Direction should be set somewhere in the intersection of what you enjoy, what you want your life to look like, and what the world needs. Welcome back to another episode of the Nomad's Notebook. My name is Joe Maxwell, and today we're going to be talking about the universal law of success. We'll discuss the myth of the overnight success through the lens of a basketball player and the famous writer Stephen King. I am one of the biggest sports fans out there. I was a collegiate athlete myself, and even since I've retired, I've held a keen interest for many different sports, particularly hockey, obviously, because I'm Canadian, track and field, because that's what I did when I was competing myself, and then American football as well, just because that was such a big part of my collegiate experience, so I really fell in love with the game through college. Now, if you are at all familiar with sports, then you're going to understand this concept or this term called the overnight success, where a previously unknown and underdog player gets their shot at the pros and they ultimately earn themselves a really large, juicy contract and a prominent place on television sets across America. News outlets really love to push this narrative forward because it's really just a story that we can all get behind, right? The regular guy, we all relate to him, he gets his shot at fame, and he makes it. He comes through. It's the same motivating factor behind shows like America's Got Talent, right? Just getting this normal person and giving them a shot at fame. Over time, though, I have come to reject this concept of the overnight success as just being false. Anyone, at least in a sports setting, who finds unbelievable success in a short period of time is really only an overnight success to the people who didn't know them much before. But I can guarantee you that behind closed doors, that athlete dedicated years and years and thousands of hours of their life with the hope that one day they might get an opportunity to shine under the big lights. Basketball player Jeremy Lin is probably the best example of an overnight success story in sports history, really. In 2012, Lin was a member of the New York Knicks' development league, and due to a string of injuries to the regular players on that roster in the month of February, he got his opportunity to showcase himself in the NBA. So he gets this shot, and with consistent, exceptional performances, including a number of game-winning shots, he grew into a superstar and a household name across America in just a few short weeks. The term Linsanity was coined, and he became one of the most talked about players in league history. The media, of course, was quick to jump on this story. They highlighted the fact that this athlete seemingly came out of nowhere, but in reality, Lin had been working consistently for the past 10 years, refining his skills on a daily basis. He was a standout player through all of his high school career. He played 4 years at Harvard University and spent 2 years in the NBA Development League before he finally got his shot under the lights. Now, if fans had seen just a small glimpse into his work ethic in the years leading up to 2012, then they wouldn't have been nearly as surprised as they seem to be. Well, the story of Jeremy Lin leads me into my main thought today about this universal pattern of success. Any great success in life where people will stand up and take notice of what you're doing is going to require an enormous amount of work and dedication. I think we all know that, and that's something we would all agree on. In most cases, it's going to be 5 to 10 years of dedicated daily effort before the person finds substantial recognition for all that work. For those of us who want better for ourselves in life, and I think anyone listening to this is going to fall into that category, those early years can be really difficult, right? They're lonely. At times they get incredibly dark because we don't really fit in with our regular group of friends anymore. Maybe they're dragging us down the wrong path. We can't spend as much time with them. So we're left to tread this unknown path alone. And what's worse is that the progress that we make during this time is often so small that it seems like we're going nowhere. And this can lead us to think that we're on the wrong path entirely. But that's rarely the case. You were on the right path, but it usually just takes a lot longer to get where we want to go than we might initially think when we start out. This concept for me was reinforced through a book that I finished not long ago. I recently picked up Stephen King's On Writing. And by picked up, I mean I bought the audiobook, okay? Does anyone else tell people that they actually read a book, like the assumption they read a paper book, when in reality, you actually just listen to that book on Audible? I do that a lot. I don't know why. But anyway, a big goal of mine is to improve my writing and storytelling ability. I'll usually script a good portion of this podcast beforehand just to make sure that I'm getting to all the points that I want to and explaining them in a clear and concise manner. I'm not talking in circles, right? If I'm just talking off the top of my head. And I did some searching around for good books on storytelling. On Writing was at the top of the list, so just went ahead and bought a copy of it on Audible. And to my delight, Mr. King narrates his own book himself. Now, personally, I always prefer the audiobooks that are narrated by the author. There's just something more engaging about it. I don't really know to explain it much better than that, but I suppose that the author knows the exact meaning that they were going for, and they're able to place emphasis and emotion on the correct phrases. In fact, I was reading 12 Rules for Life by Jordan Peterson. Great book. And in that story, he talks about a childhood friend who grows up and goes down a very dark path, eventually killing himself when he's about 40 years old. And throughout that story, you can hear the pain and the emotion in Dr. Peterson's voice. It's like he's about to cry. It's very real. And it brings the story to life in a way that a narrator just wouldn't be able to. I haven't been an avid reader of Stephen King's work. I grew up in a very religious household where anything related to horror was banned from the house. And even after moving out for college, I never really developed an interest in that genre. My one previous experience with Dr. King came through an English horror literature class that I took in my first year. It was an elective. I had to get it out of the way. And I really only signed up for that class because it was a 2-minute walk from my dorm room, so super convenient. And the professor for that class had really good ratings. In the end, it turned out to be a great decision. My teacher for that class, Dr. Locke was his name, was one of the most incredible just people I've ever met. And of the dozens of professors that I've had over the years throughout college, he's going to be one of the few that I will remember for the rest of my life. Maybe you guys have some of those. But even Dr. Locke's incredible teaching just couldn't persuade me to actually read the book for the class, which was Salem's Lot by Stephen King. I read the Spark Notes enough to speak reasonably intelligently enough in class, and then fake my way through a final paper, which I did get an A on, by the way. I just want to make note of that. Faking it was kind of the story of my entire college career, if I'm being honest, at least my academic career. But I graduated with a 3.3 GPA, so get off my case. Anyway, I started listening to On Writing, not really knowing what to expect. I figured it would be a manual on how to write and tell stories, and that's what it's predictably turned out to be, but maybe not in the format that you might think. King starts out with a quick biography of his life. Stephen King grew up incredibly poor and with just a single mother to raise him and give him direction. But from the time he was in middle school, he just had this innate, intense passion for both reading and writing. In high school, he took it a step further and he started writing for his school newspaper. And by the time he was then approaching graduation, he began writing short stories just on his own for fun. After he graduated high school, King had to work a number of odd jobs just to make ends meet, right? Because he didn't have any family money or no one really to help him out. Then at 23, he married his high school sweetheart. Her name was Tabitha. And the two of them moved into a trailer together because that's all they could really afford. And both of them had to work countless jobs and long hours just to stay afloat. But through all of this, he never lost sight of that passion. King would write a minimum of 2,000 words every single day, usually in the evenings and sometimes on his lunch breaks too. He began to submit the stories for publication shortly thereafter, but the results weren't good. It just seemed to be rejection after rejection, but that didn't get his spirits down because he simply loved what he was doing. After 35 straight no's from the publishers, one story was picked up by a small magazine, and he was paid a whopping $35. Life-changing amount, right? But he kept writing. He didn't let that distract him. He wrote some more, and a few years later, something even better happened. He got the green light for the publication of his novel titled Carrie, and along with that came a handsome advance of $2,500, which in today's money, remember this is happening in the early 70s, it's going to be more like $8,000 or $10,000. Stephen King had almost forgotten about Carrie after he began work on his next story, but he had heard through the grapevine that some movie production companies might be interested in the film rights for that movie, but it was all rumor at that point, so he didn't give it much headspace and he didn't really know how much money it might be, so he didn't really care. Then one day in 1975, he's sitting on his back porch, enjoying the sunshine, just relaxing, and the phone rings. So he stumbles inside, he picks up the receiver, and he's greeted by the voice of his agent. He very quickly realized this call was about his novel, Carrie. The film rights for that book had been sold for $400,000. King quit his teaching job the very next day, and the rest is, as they say, history. The first thing that's so interesting about Stephen King's story is the fact that before he was a 35-time best-selling author and a multi-millionaire, just so wealthy, he was just a regular guy, right? No big inheritance, no successful parents to help him along, and really no lucky breaks, right? He had to put his work in. And in fact, when he was starting out, he was probably a lot worse off financially than many of you listening to this right now. But what he did have was this burning passion and a commitment that no matter what, he was never going to stop writing. And I think those two things go hand in hand, right? The passion and the persistence. Any success that's going to be worth having in life will require persistence over a long period of time. In some cases, years and years of daily grinding with little to nothing happening. And the only way, realistically, you're going to be able to sustain this kind of effort is through a deep, burning passion that's going to push you through those difficult days. What's the first step? Well, in my mind, everything starts with direction. In the previous episode on this podcast about passion, we spent a lot of time talking about this as well. I think that direction should be set somewhere in the intersection of what you enjoy, what you want your life to look like, and what the world needs. Somewhere in that mix is a pursuit that you can grow to truly enjoy that will improve the world and probably make you really wealthy along the way. Once that direction has been set, it's about going to work consistently every single day. There's going to be a huge amount of work up front where it'll seem like nothing is paying off and you'll question what you're doing. But by setting that groundwork, you're preparing for the inevitable exponential success that will come down the road. You just don't know when that's going to be. And that's the thing that catches most people and it causes them to lose hope and ultimately quit. And if you quit, you're basically guaranteeing you're never going to find success. There's a quote from Winston Churchill that I've really fallen in love with lately. Back in 1940, he said the words, "Success is not final. Failure is not fatal. It is the courage to continue that counts." Doesn't that just inspire you? It gives me goosebumps when I hear that, especially when you consider who Churchill was and when he said this. At this time, he was literally facing evil head on and potentially the end of the free world as we know it. That's what he was facing. And yet he knew that it was going to be a long war and that persistence would ultimately win in the end. And history will show us that he was right. I also find that the first part of the quote is particularly interesting. He says that success is not final. That's an important concept to keep in mind as well as we continue down our individual journeys, that successes, both big and small, will start to pop up, and that's great. We want to celebrate those, but we can't let that distract us from our daily consistent steps towards the ultimate goal. So with that, I'm going to wrap things up there, how I always do, with another quote. "The only guarantee for failure is to stop trying. Thanks for listening.